Disclaimer: the content presented in this video is purely fictional and intended for entertainment purposes only.
I'm a contract worker for a secret corporation that hunts supernatural creatures. I'm out of retirement. I found myself sitting on the floor of my apartment, wearing 3 layers of clothing while cutting out coupons for tonight's meal. Any money in the bank was put aside for my phone bill and rent. I didn't even have enough for a loaf of bread. My work options had also dried up. Who would want to hire a guy with a resume like mine? For most of my adult life, I did a job where I couldn't be upfront with new employers. If I said I had been a monster hunter until 2 years ago, I would be kicked out of any interview. I found myself at a breaking point. I needed a job soon, or else I would be on the streets in a few weeks. Or starve to death. Whichever came first, a ping came from my phone. I'd been ignoring the emails for a while. Even though I stopped hunting monsters, the job offers were still emailed. I needed to face the hard facts. If I didn't accept a contract job, I wouldn't be around for much longer. Hunting monsters wasn't easy. Sure, some are pretty harmless to humans. Those kinds of assignments didn't pay much, but you had a better chance of walking away with your life. The problem is, it's hard to tell between the harmless creatures and the bloodthirsty ones. The dangerous creatures tended to randomly show up. I've heard of hunters in the middle of a job relocating pesky supernatural creatures to get ambushed by something they didn't have the strength to deal with. Starve to death or get eaten by some sort of monster. What a choice my life had led me to. I finally caved and picked up my phone, scrolling through to see if any of the open requests were suited for me. I didn't have any weapons left over from my hunting days. I sold those first to stay afloat. If I didn't have such a massive debt, I might have managed not to resort to my old job. Almost all of the requests required a partner, or equipment I didn't have. I spotted one that might be what I could handle. Some pale human creatures had been spotted in popular camping grounds. Some people have gone missing, with no traces of their bodies. I've heard of white creatures made up of mushrooms that imitate humans. Those were too risky to deal with. If you're touched by them, they infect you. From what the job request listed, there was a good chance these weren't the mushroom creatures, so I had a chance. I sighed, wondering if I was going to come back alive after I sent an email accepting. I really let myself go in the past 2 years. My old injuries didn't help. The cold made my knees and hips stiff. I did some stretching to get ready for what I just committed to. Within the next few hours, I found myself at the start of a hiking trail, a heavy pack weighing down my steps. Since I didn't have any gear, I rented some out. The corporation that sends out these requests is pretty generous. If the items aren't damaged, I could return the gear at the end of the job for no cost. But when it came to hunting monsters, you always ended up ruining your clothing and gear. Anything damaged would come out of my final pay. I rented out a cheap axe for a weapon. It was tipped with silver, making it hit harder against creatures. Seeing someone with an axe in the woods wouldn't raise as many eyebrows as a sword or other weapons might. Most people think guns would be the best bet against monsters. Sadly, that's not the case. Magic doesn't stick very well to bullets and guns for some reason. It's easier to bless a sword to make it more effective against a monster. For the most part, bullets just piss them off. It's not impossible though. I've heard of special bullets. The material to create them cost more than I've ever made in my lifetime. So, no guns to hunt down monsters in my future. I was given directions to the campsite that had been last attacked by the mystery creatures. My legs ached as I hiked, and I started to sweat under my heavy borrowed coat. Going right into hiking after not being active for years was a mistake. I pressed on, wanting to get to the site before the sunset. My pack had been filled with some snacks and canned goods for the trip. It was a pleasant surprise. When I stopped to eat a granola bar, I reflected on an important fact: I was lost. I didn't want to rely on my secret weapon so early on. It wouldn't get me out of the woods, but it may lead me to what creatures stalked the forest. I closed my eyes and focused on breathing. When I opened them again, the world was flooded with lights and colors normal people couldn't see. Humans shouldn't be aware of magic, let alone be able to see it. It was like how mantis shrimp could see color spectrums our eyes didn't. Because I was pushing past human limits, looking at magic hurt like hell. Normally I use this gift to focus on one creature to see how much power they held. Looking at the entire flow around me nearly split my head open. In a few seconds, I was forced to shut my eyes again, pushing down the one talent that made me useful when it came to monster hunting. Off in the distance I had seen a batch of light. Every living thing had a tiny drop of magic inside them. Supernatural creatures had far more than a drop. Since I saw a massive light together, that meant the creatures I had been looking at were huddled in one spot. I bet when the sun set, they would all leave the safety of their home to go hunting. I hurried off in that direction, praying I was going to face monsters on the weaker side. I pushed through the woods and off the trail. I considered using my sight again to double-check I was heading in the right direction. Finally, I came across a small cliffside. If I wanted, I could climb the rough, rocky wall. I followed it until I saw an opening just large enough to crawl through. A cave was perfect for darkness-dwelling monsters to hide inside. I only had less than an hour of sunlight left. These creatures most likely would be asleep. You may call me a coward for wanting to slaughter creatures in their sleep. I didn't have the power to deal with a horde on even terms. I guessed it was a horde. The mass of magic I saw was either a lot of weaker creatures or one very strong one. If I came across just one, I doubted my axe could kill it even while asleep. I left behind my borrowed pack. I only brought the axe and a water bottle attached to my hip. I double-checked that my phone was safe under layers of clothing. Even if I called for help, there wasn't a good chance anyone would show up on time. The corporation had the money and equipment for monster hunting, but not the manpower. And they always needed someone to hunt down monsters. I was on my own the moment I crawled inside. I debated on leaving. I would get paid a small amount just for locating a monster den. My debt hovered over my head, causing me to keep going forwards. I used a small pen light to look around the small space. My feet crushed small bones when I stood up. Once past the opening, the cave was large enough for a person to take 10 steps inside in any direction. There was another opening in the back that went even deeper. The layer of bones on the ground should have been enough to make me leave. I walked as quietly as possible, ducking down low through the other opening. The path caused me to hunch the entire way. I hated how loud my footsteps and breathing sounded in the small space. Finally, I came into a large space. Drips of water echoed through the massive cave. And the sounds of breathing. I wished I hadn't walked into that place. It smelled of the dead and unwashed bodies. I carefully used my small flashlight to scan the area. The piles of what I had assumed to be bones moved. The white shapes stirred in the dark. A set of white glowing eyes appeared. Then another. I gripped the axe handle tightly in my hand for an attack. I thought I was ready, but one of the creatures sprang up to latch into my back. I held back a scream as I slammed it against the wall to hear a terrible crunching sound. I turned on my heel to bring down the axe on my attacker. Thankfully, the teeth and claws hadn't got past my coat. I heard more of the monsters in the dark. I swung my weapon in time to catch one in the head. To my horror, these creatures were nothing but bones formed together in the shape of an animal-like body. This wasn't good for me. It took a lot of magic to move the dead like this. I hacked away at the bones at my feet, crushing a few of them. With more of those creatures coming at me in the dark, I decided I needed to keep moving. My light scanned the cave to show brief glimpses of the horrors it held. There were too many of these monsters. Teeth chattering in empty skulls. The clawed hands dig into the rough floor. Each sound echoed against the walls, making it hard to tell where they came from. The only way out soon became blocked by a mass of bones. I was scared. My heartbeat was so fast it overtook my hearing. I nearly dropped my axe when another creature jumped into the light and at my throat. No matter how many times I smashed them apart, the bones reformed ready to attack me again. I risked using my sight. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the true terror that had been hidden in the darkness. A massive light sat on the back of the cave that had thin strings connecting it to all the other smaller balls of light. When I hit one of the creatures, they fed from the larger magic source to reform. That did use up some power, but it was so little they could possibly reform thousands of times. I didn't get a good look at what monster was the source of the magic. I shook my head, turning off my sigh, the throbbing pain forcing me against a wall. I was stupid to accept this job. I could say that 1,000 times, but it didn't change the fact I was there. I needed to keep fighting until my body gave out. I dreaded I would become just another one of these creatures. Unless a miracle happened, that was my fate. I considered I just might get a miracle. I needed to stay alive until then. My axe came down. Again and again. The monsters not letting up their attacks. My arms got shredded with shallow cuts from those claws and teeth. My weapon soon felt too heavy for my arm to lift. My chest was on fire and my legs shook from fear. I focused on staying alive. Giving up meant dying. I'd been through worse pain before and refused to let my body give out. Just as I almost lost hope, I was rewarded for my efforts. A burst of light tore through the cave, causing the creatures made of bones to scatter. The light died down and my eyes adjusted. My mouth dropped open when I finally saw what had been controlling all the creatures inside the cave. The upper half of a massive human skeleton sat against the back wall of the cave. The eye sockets came to life with white light. The arms were so long it reached where I was on the other side of the cave. I rolled out of the way and towards the person who lit up the area. I did a double take. I never thought we would ever meet again, August. I sputtered out. He also did a double take. His wavy black hair tied back out of his face. He wore the same dress shirt and pressed pants I last saw him in. But this time a bit dirtier than before. What a coincidence. He said with a dimpled smile, since this was a job that had been sent to a few contract workers, I had hoped someone besides myself would accept it. Anyone but the person who showed up. I didn't know much about August. Only that he wasn't human and liked to eat brains. If I wasn't careful, his attention may turn in my direction. Your axe is too heavy, use this. He tossed a small baseball bat in my direction. I dropped my axe to catch it. It appeared to be a wooden bat meant for a child, however, it was perfect for this situation. It was light, so much easier for my tired arms to swing. One of the bone creatures recovered from the burst of light. It dropped down from the ceiling, teeth out ready to maul my face. I landed a hit to the skull only to see the entire body explode to pieces. The bat I had been given had some sort of spell on it that poured magic into whatever it hit. If creatures absorb more magic than their bodies can handle, they die. Explode in some cases. You take out the smaller ones, I'll do the boss. August shouted as he already was on all fours to race across the floor to the giant thread at the back of the cave. Splitting the pay for this job was better than being dead. I focused on smashing up the monsters around me once again. The only problem with that bat was it took 3 seconds to charge. I picked up my axe again in case I needed to use it when the bat ran out of power. I was so focused on the smaller creature I didn't see why August suddenly sailed across the room to slam hard into a rock wall. So much for taking care of the boss. The large hand of the skeleton came down. I narrowly avoided getting crushed. I needed to see what kind of shape August was in. If he couldn't defeat the larger monster, we would be dead. I focused my sight on him for a moment. My head hurting so much I could only see one thing. His internal magic supply was low, and he had the same thread attached to him as the other monsters did. This creature was draining his powers. Because humans had such a small magic source, it went unnoticed by most creatures. This thing didn't bother trying to drain me of the tiny hint of power I held. My ace had been knocked aside. Aside from a new weapon, my situation hadn't changed from before. I desperately needed to think of a way to get out alive, as I knocked aside monsters with the lighter bat. My mind raced. The bat was useless against the larger skeleton. It simply didn't hold enough power to do damage to the creature. I didn't have the strength to defeat it with the axe. If only I had more magic to pump into this monster to defeat it, an idea came to me. One so simple I hated myself for not thinking of it sooner. I dodged another large hand trying to crush my insides. I then focused on only looking at the threads that connected the skeleton to the other monsters. I pushed my body to the limits to race around grabbing hold of those threads. Holding pure magic hurts. You can safely pass through it unaware it's even in the air. But if you can see it and know how to take hold of it, your body rejects it. Not even monsters can hold pure magic without some sort of pain. My hand felt like it was on fire as I collected more of the threads. Claws caught my legs as I ran. Everything hurt. And I was scared as hell. Dealing with creatures isn't easier over time. You're just as scared the 100th time as you were the first time. I acted fast to ensure that fear didn't take over. When the large hand came down again, I took my chance. I jumped on the long arm bones to run straight towards the skeleton. It tried to smack me off with the other hand. I rolled off to the hard ground, avoiding getting crushed by the heavy bones. It couldn't move its hands fast enough to stop me from running in front of the ribcage. With my left hand full of the threads, I thrust it forward, pulling all the magic from the creatures connected to them. If you don't have good control of magic, it backfires. This is what I wanted. Without a purpose, the power on the other end of the threads came racing towards my hands. In the last second, I gave that power one simple order: go back to where it came from. A bright light blocked my vision. My body was thrown back as all the sound disappeared. I didn't think I was still alive for a long while. When I opened my eyes and lifted my head, I saw the damage I had created. Pieces of bones were scattered all over the cave. Not a single skull was intact. I looked to my side to see the only other living thing in the cave. August sat up covered in white bone dust. He met my eyes and gave me a thumbs up. He didn't know what happened, only that the job was finished. Do you want to come to my place to clean up? He offered. No. I didn't. I hurt. A lot. I almost refused, but then considered he might have a bathtub instead of my dinky shower, only if you don't try to eat me. I said with a groan, it was self-defense. You stabbed me. He replied with a shrug. We reported that the job had been finished. A cleanup crew would be by shortly and payment was being arranged. Since 2 people took the job, they needed to know how to split the pay. I really needed the money. But I told them to split it in half. If August didn't show up, I would be dead. Since he wasn't human, he could create a doorway directly to his place. We walked out of the cave into a house I wasn't expecting to be as nice as it was. I didn't take in a lot of details. I was just directed to the bathroom to get all the blood and dust off. Everything stung, but that soon went away in the hot water. August knew I didn't have clean clothing, so he set out some of his for me to change into. He was slightly taller, but the sweater and sweatpants fit just fine. I went downstairs to ask him to get me close to home. As I walked, I tripped over a toy truck. I carefully put it aside so no one would trip on it again. Then I wondered why he would even have something like that in his house. A terrible thought came to me as I entered the kitchen to see him struggling to cook chicken nuggets. At the table sat a small person I hadn't seen since we first met. The small boy we found in the rundown house was coloring at the table as if this was normal. I hissed at August, motioning for him to talk to me in the other room. Why do you have him? I half whispered, I figured you already knew I did. Why else would I be exhausting myself on all these jobs? He answered back. I looked him over. He appeared tired. From what I saw of him when we first met, he should have been able to defeat the skeleton that day. Now, he looked at his last legs. If he just adopted a child, he would need money and fast. No wonder he looked so awful. Why would anyone trust you with him? I asked a very important question. That's an offensive question. You eat one brain in front of someone and they assume you're a monster. He added with a laugh, you are one. His face fell. He looked a little angry. I spoke the truth. You've never told me your name. August said, ignoring what I just said, that was right. I never bothered telling him when we met. I figured we would never see each other again. He did let me clean up at his place, so I owed him an introduction, Richmond. I said, now, Rich. August said, but I cut in, Richmond. I sternly corrected, now, Richie. August carried on. I'll admit I'm a monster. And so was the mother who sold her child for her next fix. His aunt and uncle have been contacted, but they're not ready to take in a child. I'm currently the only person who wants him. I'm not saying that makes me a good person or any less of a monster. I'm just saying he's safe with me because I'm a very simple thing. I paused, considering his words before I asked him to explain. What's that? His face turned into another dimpled smile. One that held no malice behind it. Someone who loves his son. I've accepted another leash, and I couldn't be happier. Now stay for dinner. In the few months since I saw him last, August went from a monster that just was used to solve supernatural problems to one that focused his power to take care of an unwanted child for no other reason besides love. I think a few people would have thought I was crazy for believing him. If anyone saw the look in his eyes when he saw the boy at the table, they wouldn't doubt his devotion. I took over cooking dinner so August could help his foster son color. The boy didn't talk much, but I thought he was a good child. It took a few tries for him to tell me his name. In the end, he scribbled Lucas with crayons on one of his drawings. When I told him my name, he started writing it repeatedly until dinner was ready. August didn't eat, so he packed some leftovers for me to take home. When I accepted this job, I wasn't expecting to end the day like this. Lucas was sent to bed and August offered to use my apartment door to get me directly to my place. I refused, not trusting him with access to my apartment. I was dropped off at a bus stop a few blocks away instead. I got home, so tired I could barely stand. I didn't show how much my hand hurt or how badly I'd been wounded in the fight at dinner time. August would have forced me to go see a doctor. I simply couldn't afford that. Better to just rest and sleep it off. As I put away the containers of leftover nuggets, I saw a drawing August had tucked away between them. I smiled, seeing the childish scribbles I assumed to be my face. Just before I passed out for the night, I checked my phone to see if the payment had been sent. A new contact had been added to my phone. One that just texted me to see if I got back home or died on the way. August must have gotten to my phone when I wasn't watching. I sent him a frowning emoji, hoping he understood how I disapproved of his invasion of privacy. contract work would be way easier with a second person, or a monster on my side. I curled up, quickly falling asleep that night, refusing to even consider asking for help ever again.